Hello, my friends, and welcome to today's episode of Stand Up, where my guest will be Alex Aronson. Such a very important guest and expert. This might be one of the most important people in conversations that I've had on the podcast, and had a lot of important conversations, I think, so that's saying a lot. He is the former chief counsel for Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, who was the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. He's led Senate investigations. He has been a political organizer, civil rights lawyer, a judicial ethics expert. He's now the director of a nonprofit called Court Accountability and working on some really important projects to help fight for democracy. Alex Aronson is back on the show for the second time, and this is a real important conversation. It starts at about 17 minutes into today's show after the headlines, and I hope you like it, and tell your friends about it, tell your friends about him, and follow him and support his work. All right, well, let's get to those headlines, and thank you very much for everybody who's been emailing me this week and leaving comments on various different platforms where the show is posted. Of course, Patreon. A lot of nice things being said about the show, about Anna Marie Cox, as well as yesterday David K. Johnston, and all of my guests that have three names you guys seem to really like. Thank you for the great feedback. I'll just read Shannon White's real quick. Shannon emails and says, Pete, thank you so much for having David K. Johnston on. I feel so much more informed and educated after listening to this. He's one of the best interviews you've had in a long time. Not that many haven't been great. Bravo, Shannon. Shannon, thank you very much. Always love to hear from you and everybody else who shares your feedback. Oh, by the way, Carlo in Canada, who is going to be joining us in Las Vegas, March 22nd and 23rd. Very excited to see Carlo. He emailed me to tell me that the Saturday Night Live clip I played, the weekend update clip I played on the Monday show, it didn't work. He said, it really didn't work because so much of the humor was dependent on visual images. I know that you tried to tell us what was being shown, but it's really difficult to hear what you're saying. In addition, it threw the timing of the bit off. I normally do enjoy the comedy bits, like today's, but it just did not work on Monday. You'd better get your producer Schmeat working on that, okay? Yes, of course, Schmeat was killed. He was chopped up and thrown into the woods behind the shed, and then Keith did a short stint on the program, and he's no longer with us. And of course, now Lefty is working on the show, and I'll be honest with you, he's a total wreck and messes up everything. So we can always blame anything that anybody doesn't like on Lefty. I forget who coined that one, but you should get credit. All right, let's get to those headlines, shall we, my friends? Well, we are off, and the presidential election is officially underway. That's what the experts say about Super Tuesday. It's really not underway until Super Tuesday is over, and it is. Presidential contest not the only one on the ballot. Of course, in North Carolina, they had a gubernatorial primary, and it looks like it'll be Josh Stein, who is the Democrat that has been nominated there, and he is running against a guy named Mark Robinson, who is a real extremist who's been endorsed by Donald Trump. He's described gay people as filth. He claimed Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby were victims of a left-wing plot. He wants to ban abortion. And, he's a black man, critical of the Black Panther film because, well, Jews. Crazy. Former factory worker who kind of went viral in a pro-gun rant and somehow got elected as the lieutenant governor in North Carolina. Well, he's the guy that Republicans have nominated to be their candidate in November. So I think that gives the Democrat Josh Stein a pretty good shot at it. And Adam Schiff has a pretty good shot at it in California because he beat out Katie Porter for the Democratic nomination. Well, the top two vote getters are on the ballot, and he ran a campaign really apparently helping promote the Republican Steve Garvey, who has a very tiny chance of winning in the state of California statewide. So Adam Schiff will be the nominee for the Democratic Party for Senate in November. Those are the two big elections outside the presidential primaries that I was watching. The headlines are resounding primary victories, pull party frontrunners closer to nominations. Trump-Biden win big on Super Tuesday at Washington Post. New York Times, almost the same headline. Trump and Biden win big across Super Tuesday states. Haley takes Vermont, blocking a Trump sweep. Another headline, on a bright night for his campaign, Donald Trump conjures a dark vision. The New York Times and USA Today, Donald Trump and Joe Biden win easily on Super Tuesday. The former president won 12 out of 13 states that have been called by 11 p.m. Eastern across different regions. Raked in large troves of GOP delegates when he scored victories in California, Texas, North Carolina, and Virginia. However, Nikki Haley did win in Vermont, and some guy named Scott Palmer one in American Samoa. So you've got those two storylines also unfurling that really don't matter. But Nikki Haley is still in it as of now. So we'll see if she makes any announcements on Wednesday. She didn't speak on Tuesday night anywhere. Yesterday, Taylor Swift came out and put her finger on the scale for who? Well, democracy. She urged her 282 million followers on Instagram, quote, to vote for the people who most represent you into power. If you haven't already, make a plan to vote today. So that's good because you want to believe that most of her Instagram followers are young people or women who are more likely to vote for people who uphold democracy, which would be, well, Democrats. Other outcome storylines that unfolded yesterday, Colin Allred has become the Democrats' nominee to run against Ted Cruz in the Texas Senate race. He's a former NFL linebacker. He won a decisive victory. He can now skip another round against State Senator Roland Gutierrez and focus on the more daunting task of defeating Ted Cruz in the general election. I guess the other story that unfolded was just the data of the voting. Obviously, the exit polls and what people said to pollsters and warning signs for the disgraced former president in the Haley vote. A majority of Nikki Haley's primary voters said they were voting against her opponent more than for her, a sign of anti-Trump motivation that could last until November. And even in defeat, she was leading among moderate voters by nearly 2-1. Of course, her issue is that moderates make only about 20% of the voters in a Republican primary, which what is a moderate Republican, by the way? Either way, in a close general election, those voters may matter a lot, and that's why a lot of focus is being put on them, probably rightly so. All right, that's all I've got for you on the primaries. No real big surprises. I guess tangential surprise yesterday wasn't the primaries, but it was news that in Arizona, the senator who has been an independent for, I think, the last year, she was elected as a Democrat, Kyrsten Sinema, said she would not seek re-election in Arizona, ending over a year of speculation about her future. That means it will be the great Ruben Gallego versus the disgraced Carrie Lake in Arizona. A couple quick reactions to that, by the way. Norm Ornstein tweets, the Senate will not miss Kyrsten Sinema. She turned a blind eye to Republican obstructionism and refused to consider any filibuster reform that would have restored the rules to what they should be. Our friend Noel Kasler said about it, when all is said and done, let us not forget what a con job mindfuck Kyrsten Sinema's time in office has been. She should be a warning to all of us that the greedy freaks work both sides of the aisle. In a way, she was our George Santos, but the story was missed. We lost a lot of progress for her. Bullshit. Comedian Lori Kilmartin tweets, grateful I didn't waste my time learning how to Grateful I didn't waste my time learning how to spell Kyrsten Sinema. But the best take came from writer at Jezebel, Susan Rincunas, who said under the headline, Sinema will forever be remembered for fucking people over, and wrote, the infuriating progress-blocking Arizona senator said she won't run for a second term. Good riddance. Kyrsten Sinema does not get stuff done. She famously blocked progress, and for that, voters turned on her. She was elected Senate in 2018. She'll likely remain most famous for parading around in the loudest, tackiest clothes imaginable, doing a sassy hip-hop while voting to block an increase to the unlivable federal minimum wage and generally fucking over Americans for no conceivable reason. In a video announcing her retirement, she chose to gaslight voters about her record. She said, because I choose civility, understanding, listening, working together to get stuff done, I will leave the Senate at the end of the year. Of course, as she said, she famously doesn't get stuff done. And finally, Susan Rincunas writes, she may be retiring, but it's not a stretch to imagine that she's going to stay in Washington to make an ungodly sum at a lobbying firm and continue her legacy of zealous advocacy for corporations and rich people. Rest in piss, Kyrsten. Wow. There you go on Kyrsten Sinema. And speaking of disgraced senators, one that's still in the Senate is Robert Menendez of New Jersey. And yesterday we learned he and his wife would be charged with obstruction of justice. He already faced bribery charges, but in this new federal indictment that dropped yesterday, it added to these wide-ranging bribery and corruption charges that he and his wife Nadine Menendez now face. Prosecutors accused the couple of trying to cover up a bribe by making it look like a loan. In the process, they lied to their own lawyers, who in turn inadvertently misrepresented the arrangement to the federal prosecutors from the Southern District of New York, according to the updated indictment. Robert Menendez has got to go. Speaking of our George Santos, it would be him, if anything, Noel Casler. Another really important story that probably won't get as much attention as it should. It's not the sexiest story in the world, I suppose, but White House officials continue to work on measures to make Americans' lives a bit better. Yesterday, the Biden administration announced a rule to cap all credit card late fees. The latest effort in the White House push to end what is called junk fees, a move that regulators say will save Americans up to $10 billion a year. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's new regulations will set a ceiling of $8 for most credit card late fees, or require banks to show that they should charge more than $8 for such a fee. Oh, and the banks are pissed. Their lobbyists are pissed. This was not an easy thing to get done and could get rolled back. But a new federal rule capping most credit card late fees at $8 a month is a big, important story. It's a big effing deal. And I hope that Democrats and the Biden administration gets proper credit for it, but they probably won't. But at least we should give it to them when we talk about the good things that they're doing each and every day. I try to mention that here on the show. Well, the massive Texas wildfire is finally dying down, but its impacts could last years. It could take years for grasses to regrow and cattle to return. The costs of rebuilding are massive and won't be covered by insurance. Texans are praying a spate of wildfires roaring across its panhandle region will finally be extinguished in a matter of days. But as the embers die out, leaders of the state's agriculture industry say it could be years before farms and ranches recover from the historic blazes, according to the New York Times. So that's today's news out of this wild, massive, record-breaking Texas wildfire. Also, did your Facebook or Instagram go down yesterday? The parent company Meta didn't have the greatest day. Facebook and Instagram, they're back online after a, quote, technical issue caused a widespread outage earlier in the day. Of course, the outage occurred on Super Tuesday, when over a dozen states had to do polls for presidential primaries. Self-reported outages on both platforms surged after 10 a.m. yesterday, reaching more than 583,000 reports on Facebook alone. More than 92,000 outages were reported on Instagram. This is all coming from the tracking site Down Detector. Meta suffered a similar widespread outage in 2021 that lasted hours, the company later said was caused by a routine maintenance error. And the evil cartoon villain billionaire that seems to cohabitate with a lot of Nazi ideology, Elon Musk, appeared to weigh in on the outage on his platform, formerly known as Twitter, posted on X that, if you're reading this post, it's because our servers are working. All right, well, that's what happened online. Social media, big story yesterday. In other news, jury selection began in the trial of the young man who is charged with involuntary manslaughter after his son killed 4 people at a Michigan high school. A cyber attack that paralyzed the largest healthcare payment system in the U.S. threatened hospitals and clinics across the country yesterday. And that's a much bigger story than I'm giving it credence and credit to. Just going to have to read more into how that story played out and what it means for a whole bunch of small businesses, including urgent care centers, cancer centers, primary care doctors, and others who were profoundly affected by the aftermath of a cyber attack 2 weeks ago that paralyzed largest U.S. billing and payment system in the country. Let's see. Also, there was this from a federal appeals court news dropping that Florida has been blocked from enforcing a law backed by their governor, Ron DeSantis, that restricts how private companies teach diversity and inclusion in the workplace. A 3-judge panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit ruled Monday that the, quote, Stop Woke Act exceeds the bounds of the U.S. Constitution's First Amendment right to freedom of speech and expression in its attempts to regulate workplace trainings on race, color, sex, and national origin. A fascinating decision out of the 11th Circuit. We'll see if that gets challenged by Ron DeSantis, and the Stop Woke movement, if you will, coincides with the white supremacy movement, if you will. And listen to this story from Dartmouth College. The men's basketball team there voted in favor of becoming the first ever labor union for college athletes on Tuesday. The vote could present a huge shakeup to the National Collegiate Athletics Association model, which currently allows college athletes to financially benefit from the role on teams through name, image, and likeness. And I thought that was an interesting story. It took shape apparently in the campus dining hall, and pretty fascinating. We'll see what happens. And in Alaska, the stupidest thing in the world, sorry, but the slag dog races, the Iditarod, it's both fascinating and really cruel to animals, became crueler, I feel like, when one of the dog racers killed a moose to protect himself and his dogs. Apparently, under the rules, as long as he guts the moose, he can continue the race. It's just not a thing, a cultural tradition that I understand very well, animal racing. And it's not a hill I'm going to die on, but I will make fun of it. And finally, one of the most important stories yesterday on the Middle East, U.S. President Joe Biden. I don't know why I read it like that. U.S. President Joe, like you didn't know who I was talking about. He said yesterday that a deal for a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip in exchange for the release of Israeli hostages was now in the hands of Hamas, as delegations held a third day of talks with no signs of breakthrough. A Hamas leader in Lebanon appeared to reject a proposed ceasefire deal that the U.S. is backing and then launch rockets at Israel. And in a rare comment from the disgraced former president Donald Trump about Gaza, he said yesterday, Israel has to finish the problem. It's a war against Hamas and Gaza. While Israeli leaders are facing mounting criticism for their handling of the war, Trump he thinks they need to finish the problem. I wonder what that means. All right, well, those are your headlines. And unfortunately, I ran out of time to get to sound. I had a whole bunch of clips that I wanted to share with you, but I've got to get this show posted by 6 a.m. It's already late, so I want to do that for you right now because my conversation with Alex Aronson is so much more important than all the sound bites that I would have spent time pulling. I want to get right to it now with him. And I hope to see you at tonight's Hangout at 8 p.m. Can't do it on Thursday, so I'll be doing that this evening at 8 p.m. I hope to see you there if you're a paid subscriber. If not, go to patreon.com/ptomic right now. Sign up and join us because they're always a great time to refill your cup, renew your spirit, and even faith in humanity at our Hangouts. And it's tonight instead of tomorrow. Okay, as I've said everywhere, Alex Aronson is a real important guy. A lawyer, a strategist, organizer, an advocate, Stanford law grad. He worked for the Department of Justice under Obama, left under Trump, went to work for Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, who has been the staunchest critic of the Supreme Court in the United States Senate. Is now the executive director for Court Accountability, which is an important public interest nonprofit. He's doing some really important work behind the scenes that hopefully soon we'll be able to talk more about. But basically, he knows where all the bodies are buried. I mentioned in our conversation, he reminds me of an important pivotal character in like a John Grisham novel, because he's one of the few people who saw what happened under Trump in terms of justices that he appointed to courts up and down, the power structure of the American legal system during the Trump administration, and he has followed to see what they're all doing, and he is blowing the whistle, letting us know how we can all play a role in being the resistance to these courts that want to remake America into this theocratic Gilead-like nation where white men are in charge and women have to stay home, and I don't know, gender roles, all of it. It's crazy. Alex Aronson is awesome. I could keep talking about him, but instead, let's get right to the conversation right now. Follow him on Twitter where you can read more and learn more. He is still using that platform very effectively. All right, here we go. Let's do it. All right, there he is. He so impressed us the first time he joined us. I'm really excited to have you back. And I'm also happy that you're still on Twitter and tweeting and helping us understand in a way that very few people can what the hell is happening. Alex, welcome back. Thank you so much for taping with me again.
Thanks so much, Pete. It's great to be back with you.
Tell me a little bit about this project you've been working on, by the way, this court accountability nonprofit, because you're doing a really good work to try to educate and inform the most important people, stakeholders, policymakers, right?
Yeah, thanks so much. So, I started an organization called Court Accountability in July of last year. It's a nonprofit research and advocacy group that builds off work I did in the Senate for Senator Whitehouse, where I really, sort of was part of the team that led his work trying to expose the dark money threat to the federal judiciary, the work of Leonard Leo and the Federalist Society, and spending decades in investing in the development of this talent pipeline full of these real movement zealots that when Trump came to power, the McConnell Senate just started packing into the courts like a conveyor belt. And so I was there for that, sitting there watching as these judges were getting installed into life tenured positions and frankly sort of feeling really alarmed about what I felt was an inadequate, almost like immune reaction from the Democratic Party, from our broader political ecosystem, from the media.
I feel like you're like the character in a John Grisham novel. And I mean that. Like, you saw anybody who saw those justices being appointed during that time knew. I mean, I always interviewed people that would say things. These judges are crazy and they're going to be this and they're going to be that. But you knew, you were watching it. And so you were that character in the novel that was watching all of the chemicals be poured into the lake. And you said, don't drink this water. And now you're telling us basically you're ringing the alarms because those judges are now making these decisions. How am I doing and explaining what I think the urgency is of you and several others who saw this happening?
Yeah, I mean, it's hugely urgent. And that's right. I was there for Supreme Court confirmations and lower court confirmations. And it was just clear that it was, an agenda being deployed on us through the courts, right? The branch that's supposed to be independent, protecting the rule of law and ensuring equal justice under law. And, it's just this conveyor belt, like I said, of movement extremists. People dyed in the wool who were committed to the advancement of a reactionary, billionaire agenda, frankly. And right. So we just weren't responding with the kind of urgency that, we needed to, because the reason I think the threat is so urgent and severe is what they're doing with the court and with the judicial power fundamentally to erode, democracy, right? They're using this unelected power to advance an extreme, reactionary, deeply unpopular agenda that hurts most people and really helps billionaires, makes billionaires a whole lot richer. And, as they're doing that, we're just sort of like watching them do it. And we're saying, oh, well, the court has all this power and there's nothing we can do about it. But there's a whole lot we can do, actually, if we just sort of mobilize and rethink some of the premises upon which this court is wielding such extreme power. And so the work I'm doing at Court Accountability is to sort of really jumpstart our politics around this stuff, to help uncover evidence of special interest corruption and conflicts of interest at the court, and then really spread those messages among my advocacy partners, with the press, with all sorts of folks that really need to understand how this threat affects their lives.
So, but the issue, though, I feel like is one that specifically needs to take into regard the time, I'm trying to look it up, between today and the election. Because what you're saying about what we can do, so much of it matters in terms of what branches of the government that have not been taken over by fascist theocrats who want to turn America into Gilead. How much of what you're saying and the work you're thinking about and the things that we can do, the levers we can pull, the letters we can write, the doors we can knock on, all of the advocacy, the money we can send matters between now and Election Day?
I mean, this election is hugely important. I think everybody at this point that's paying attention to what's happening in our country recognizes the scale of the threat to democracy that another Trump presidency would present. And, of course, the court is going to be an important bulwark in, preventing the worst excesses of a potential dictatorship. I think it's an open question how effective any court will be in being able to constrain, a future dictator Trump. But, we have to be honest that we can't count on this court to do that. And so, given that reality, and we saw that, just this week with the court's decision in the Trump insurrection case, which was clearly a politically motivated decision, really not grounded in any law, not tied to originalism. And so I think it's a real urgent priority for voters to be thinking about the courts and the power they wield over the policies and laws that govern our lives and making voting choices based on them. So really taking a hard look at the candidates that you're looking at, and not just federal candidates, but state candidates too, because this judicial apparatus is at work in the states as well. And to, really prioritize the election of new elected officials who understand this problem and are going to think creatively and ambitiously about the reforms they could advance to solve our problems here.
If you don't know who your legislators are, it's okay, not judging. If you don't know who's running, that's fine. But today, find out. Find out who your legislators are. Find out who's running and support the ones that support democracy. And by that, I generally mean Democrats, unfortunately. Can't believe that we're here. But that is what...
And injecting courts into the democracy conversation, I think it's overlooked, right? I think a lot of people understand that we're under a democracy threat, but it's a little abstract. And I think understanding the role the court is playing and, who installed them, who's bringing the cases that they're hearing and how they're changing the law to help themselves to stack the deck in their favor if we actually internalize the extent to which these courts, these judges, have been weaponized by political actors and special interests to hurt us, I think we would be more empowered to sort of prioritize political response to this, because that's what we need.
Yes. Telling the story is so important so people understand what has happened. Very few people know that story as well as you and some other journalists and constitutional law scholars that obviously have paid attention to the court and what's changed, certainly since the Supreme Court has changed and since Trump was president. But you could go all the way back. I guess you can tell us where you want to start. But that story is so important. And I wonder sometimes how there hasn't been a book or like an unauthorized autobiography of Leonard Leo and the Federalist Society and what they did to create the current court makeup, or like even a movie. Like, I want to tell that story in a film and a feature film about that dude, because it's that dramatic. And the stuff that Alex knows, and I tangentially know because I follow people like you and read the reporters covering this and the books about it. Like, it is really insidious, dangerous, crazy stuff. I guess the easiest thing to go to, what do you think about how that story could be best told, or who has told that story? Obviously, Jane Meyer and other reporters, but who's told the story of Leonard Leo and the Federalist Society best? And how do we do it better so people know?
Yeah, a really great question. One of the big kind of nuts that we are trying to crack in our work at Court Accountability, because we see it exactly that way, right? We see this as a massive and sweeping story that spans 50 years at the very least, and has just huge implications for every single American in the country, and even much more broadly than that internationally. So in terms of the coverage of Leonard Leo, it's pretty new that we've come to learn so much about his operations and how much power, money, and influence he has come to wield over his years of working as a Republican adjacent operative in the conservative legal movement. The first great piece that was published by him was by Jane Michelson, and I believe it was in the Daily Beast several years ago. I think that was 2017. Bob O'Hara and Sean Boberg in the Washington Post in, I think, 2018 had the first big deep dive public profile of him, which really started to expose, the threads of his network and how far-reaching it actually was. And then, in this past year, the great journalists at ProPublica, Jane Meyer, has continued to do excellent reporting and has, been, really a pioneer in terms of shining a light on dark money in our political system and in our courts. And then there are, independent researchers like the brilliant Lisa Graves at True North Research, whose intrepid, really dogged shoe leather, sleuthing has led to our public knowledge about
that is
so much of the scheme.
Amazing list that you have at your fingertips, and I've written them all down, and I'll try to put links in the show notes so people can understand what this is. But basically, how about this? I'm always thinking, because of what I do for work, how to message something in 3 seconds. I wish we lived in a different world. I wish people read whole long form articles and entire books. I think that's super important, but they don't. So How about this? If you gave me $1 billion to put all the judges I wanted on all the courts of the land, what could I do? Is that kind of what happened? Like the Koch brothers and other super rich people gave Leonard Leo money. He ran the Federalist Society. He basically gave Trump the judges to choose. Like, he picked the judges.
Yeah. And I think thinking about why they picked the judges.
With unlimited money, what could I do?
Yeah. And let's just pause to think a little bit about why they picked the courts and why they picked this strategy and why it was so frankly brilliant, right? And this started, you mentioned how long it's been going on. I think you could pinpoint at a few different spots that are really important in the kind of history of these politics. But Brown versus Board of Education obviously unleashed a huge racist backlash, the massive resistance that was really where originalism, right, the purported kind of apolitical interpretive theory was developed as a political response to Brown versus Board of Education and racial integration in America. Then you fast forward ahead to the 70s, and it was corporate interests at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce who commissioned Lewis Powell, who would go on to become a Supreme Court justice the very next year, who wrote the blueprint effectively for corporate capture and infiltration of the judicial branch to start really taking seriously questions of judicial power. And then when Leonard Leo joined the Federalist Society, which at this point was a still sort of fledgling organization that had launched in the 80s to really mobilize right-wingers on law school campuses around the political aims, often, really associated with the deregulatory Reagan revolution. When Leo really started organizing was when I think they started building this really power-focused pipeline with a huge investment of billions of dollars in billionaire cash, and just massive organizing operation that sent money to all sectors of the political ecosystem to capture the courts. And I know I've been yapping a little bit here, but the courts are really important to them because of a few things. They're insulated from Democratic pushback. It's unelected. They can advance policy agendas that are deeply unpopular and not supported by public legislation, and they're protected by life tenure, so that there's really nothing you can do to get them out once they're in there.
So well said. The kind of arc of it and where you could start with Brown v. Board of Education, race, Powell, who created the legal atmosphere for companies to eat us up, yum, yum, all up, put profit all over people in a way that it wasn't really nearly as starkly before that.
Liberty.
Say it again?
In the guise of liberty.
Well, yeah. Well, there was some, it's your job is gone, but you can afford way cheaper shit at Walmart. The guy who's not doing your job for way less. But you got this nice table that'll last for a few weeks.
Yeah. Your air's polluted. Your kid's got lung disease, but
your kid could be everybody's dying, but at least you have, I don't know, I can't keep doing these trade-offs because there are none. I mean, a lot of times they just hollowed out our society, our communities. Obviously, we could talk about any number of corporate
strategies. Some of the strategies they used to do this are really insidious strategies, right? To advance some of these, corporate freedoms, really corporate freedoms that they cared a lot about. They would find these, plaintiffs of convenience, these very sort of empathetic plaintiffs who were suffering under the thumb of some government regulation, use them as a vehicle to sort of change the law through the courts. And then the upshot is that billionaires, enjoy the rights that they achieved through the convenient plaintiff they advanced.
They take some plaintiff to make the case that's going to make their industry, their company way, way richer. But they tell a story through this poor sap in a court. And then they get the ruling they want so that they can further hollow out any nutrition left in our soil.
Yeah. And they're increasingly sort of like making up fake plaintiffs because they can't find real ones, like in the 303 creative case about the gay wedding website that the woman apparently didn't want to make, but had never actually been asked to ever make.
Just unbelievable. So when we look at the arc of it all, and you've paid such close attention, you're now seeing the consequences and the results, and I wanted to just get specific. First of all, a lot of listeners have told me with their hair on fire about the Heritage Foundation, this plan 2025. You understand this intimately. You know who's behind it. You know what their goals are. What do you want to say? What do you want to tell people if they haven't heard about it?
Project 2025 is so important for everybody to understand. I can't even believe that the Heritage Foundation made this document public. It is so extreme and outrageous. And Americans, I think, are rightly catching on to just what lies in store for us if Trump wins and this gang of dark money-backed special interest theocrats are able to seize power and, install their loyalists into his next agenda. Project 2025 I think it's got over 100 dark money groups that have now signed on to it. It's this massive project of the Mandate for Leadership, which is a decades-long Christian nationalist project, really kind of inspired by Christian nationalist theocracy. Seven Mountains dominionism plays a big role here. The idea that to achieve God's mission to serve God, we must infiltrate all corners of civil society and impose God's will.
It's called Seventh Mountain dominionism. Longtime listeners know I'm actually a member. I probably should have told you before.
I have a lot of questions, Pete.
Oh, well, fire away. We're having a meeting and I will, but no, I make the joke so that people do what I did when I learned about this group through your work. Actually, I hadn't heard about this group specifically as it relates to this Alabama Chief Justice Tom Parker. Seven Mountains Mandate, the radical theocratic framework that promotes religious control over every aspect of American life. I like to interrupt you so that you'll expound on a thing that I'm losing my mind about.
Yeah, I mean, this is the plan, right? And they've been organized around these goals for many decades, right? You know, these fossil fuel billionaires and Christian extremists in the early 80s formed a very powerful, secretive hub called the Center for National Policy, Council for National Policy, that has been advancing this agenda across lots of different vectors. And you can see how it's being operationalized right now, across all the different mountains of our, society, education, academia, government, business. You can see these culture wars that these Christian nationalist interests are organizing around, are funding and driving to attack sort of the pillars of Western democracy, infiltrate them, capture them, and use them to impose their will on us in a, theocratic authoritarian system. I think it's very clearly that, just kind of analytically looking at what they plan to do. One other thing I'll say about it connects to the Supreme Court. Which is very important because the billionaires that are funding the Project 2025 plans, which also entail the recruitment of 20,000, vetted loyalists that they will be ready on day one to install. They're the same billionaires who, packed the Supreme Court and selected these justices and who have brought before the case this term a suite of cases that are designed to take out the administrative apparatus, right? This entire incredibly important apparatus of government agencies that pass regulations to protect our clean air and water and consumer safety and all these other things that we need. Yeah. So it's a coordinated play to take out, the basic functioning of American government through the courts and through this dark money cabal of, special interest groups that are, very close to Trump and very close to having power.
Yeah. SEC, FDA, EPA, FTC, whatever's left of that. I mean, it would change the way that the experts in those agencies enforce the law, or whether or not they can, or who's
entirely no, and it would turn the entire administrative state of which is populated with apolitical career experts largely across these various issue areas. They would completely eradicate those folks. They have promised to do that. They're going to fire all the career civil servants and install political vetted loyalists. So I think what this represents is an important shift in the way the right is thinking about the administrative state broadly, the role of government broadly. I think there's a shift. There's a lot of overlap with Koch, Charles Koch, who is sort of the classic anti-regulatory billionaire libertarian. He's very much involved and funds some of these groups. At the same time, what he really has long championed is like no government. We shouldn't have regulations. I, as a billionaire, should be able to pollute, as much as I want without the government having anything to say about that.
He wants to chop off the tops of every mountain in America and find out what's in them.
Exactly. It's
like when you get the chocolates.
Liberty to do so.
You're not sure what's in the chocolate, and you just keep trying them. That's what he wants to do to every mountain. What's in this one? What's in that one? He wants to do that to every mountain, lake, and stream in America, and they have. They have in so many different cases, and we've seen it. We just don't know how good we have it. The crazy irony of this is once it all comes crashing down, you realize how good you had it, how much government was actually doing every day. All we ever do is look at the potholes and the corruption, and we should. But the idea that you don't realize that there's a road for there to be potholes on, not to mention a rollout of a vaccine and the research of one. I mean, so many things that government does all day, and this would expose so much of that. Alex, tell me, though, about the idea that they could go too far. For example, the Alabama Supreme Court, run by this guy, Seven Mountain Dominionist type, he cited some crazy religious Bible stuff in his actual ruling. In concurring opinion, frozen embryos are considered minor children. Basically, he based expressly on a Christian, theologically based view of the sanctity of life. He said that an embryo cannot be wrongfully destroyed without incurring the wrath of a holy God. This is a judge in the United States of America. Is Alabama in the U.S., Alex? Tell me about this.
That's checked, I think. Yep, definitely.
So what if it goes too far? It's gone too far because the Republicans in Alabama are like, whoa, you can't get rid of IVF. You want to make it harder to get an abortion and harder to get pregnant? We won't have any people. Take it from there.
Yeah, this is the thing about like a lot of the policy positions that they sort of advance. The implications, if you kind of like stretch them to their logical conclusions, they lead to these things, right? Like what they did to overturn Roe versus Wade in the Dobbs case, it leads to the end of contraception, right? Because the right of privacy that underpins the right to, the fundamental right of abortion that they eradicated, is like, it's the same reasoning that got us there. And so, when we talk about the attacks on contraception and the Project 2025 you mentioned, very much, I think, has designs on contraception, very much steeped in their Christian nationalist ideas about sort of like social manipulation and reimagination or restoration of the American family.
They want to kill recreational sex is my best messaging.
This is not popular stuff. And they're realizing it, right? And so they're doing a couple things in retreat. And I mentioned I was shocked that they released this document, because if you read through it, it's just like every chapter is crazier than the next and gives us opportunities to point out how dangerous and bad they are.
Yeah,
right?
Please do.
So anyway, we need to get serious about this stuff and start thinking through, approaches to make them pay for these, like this majorly excessive sort of ideological extremism that is now on offer. And and so they are starting to retreat. One of the things they're also doing is starting to, viciously attack the people who are trying to hold them to account.
Yeah, talk to me about this Politico reporter who co-wrote this piece. I just lost my notes on that. Heidi is her name. Heidi Pritzbilla. I can't.
Heidi Pritzbilla. I'm just an amazing reporter at Politico, who has been on the beat of Leonard Leo and the Federalist Society influence apparatus and Supreme Court conflicts of interest and corruption, and has turned her attention more recently to this really creeping and very far advanced, theocratic authoritarianism threat, and wrote an astounding piece in Politico a couple weeks ago about Russell Vogt and a group called the Center for Renewing America, which is a major hub of this Christian nationalist dark money influence center. And in response to this exposure, which I think they recognize is not helping them, right? As people sort of, who might want IVF one day, start to get alarmed and concerned about where the law is heading by virtue of this agenda. As they start to get alarmed, they realize that this is a vulnerability for them, and they start to attack. And so they've been viciously attacking Heidi. I understand somebody sent a truck to her house yesterday. They've been sending demand letters to her employer to have her stop her coverage and retract completely accurate things that she's reported. So I think they realize that they're vulnerable here. And I think we, as people who care about democracy, who care about truth, who think it's important that this stuff is out there in the world, see a role for ourselves in, rejecting those types of attack and standing up against them, protecting democracy, journalism rather, another really important pillar of democracy that is under attack by authoritarians as part of this broader scheme. It's just really important that we all engage around it and support people like Heidi as she
absolutely because
this important work.
Yeah, we've been talking about this issue for a long time. I've been talking about Christian nationalism. It's changed names a little bit over my career, to be honest with you. But with all of the experts, anybody who's written a book or who has a Substack who's covering this, I've talked to everybody because I've tried to ring the bells here. No one's ever said anything to me. I've never been attacked, I don't think, by those people. What is happening? What is changing now with some of these high-profile reporters like Heidi at Politico and the well-financed legal and other potential? I mean, I think I told you, I've said it pretty publicly with my advocacy here. They made a false call to child protection services just because I was an advocate. And it was very bad. And I've talked about it, and I'm almost positive I know exactly who did it. The point being, they do all kinds of things to reporters, to advocates, to effective voices to silence them. Is this different? Have they upped the ante? How do we fight back?
Yeah, I think that they have. I think we're witnessing a real escalation in these types of attacks across the ecosystem. It's not just this one against Heidi, and they're doing they're escalating it. I think in qualitative ways, not just quantitative ways. For example, the attack on Heidi, they recruited a bishop, a sitting bishop of the Catholic Church, to put out a video on Twitter, parroting language from Project 2025 and attacking Heidi Pritzbilla, a guy that has connections to a lot of these Project 2025 groups. Similarly, Leonard Leo is organizing a massive counterattack, it appears, against everybody who's trying to hold him and Clarence Thomas and the corrupt justices to account. Several of his allied attorneys general that are organized through a very important dark money group he organizes called the Republican Attorneys General Association, which, organizes the Republican Attorneys General across the country.
Sounds like a fun group.
Yeah, they started sending threatening letters to the Attorney General of Washington, D.C., who was investigating Leonard Leo, advancing threats that they would engage in retaliatory investigations. And similarly, we've got House chairs like Jim Jordan and James Comer and Jason Smith engaged in a massive attack on a lot of these same interests, some of the philanthropists that fund pro-democracy work. I mean, I think what we're witnessing as they unfurl Project 2025, make clear their sort of Seven Mountains agenda, and have seized the judicial power and feel real confidence in their ability to have the court do what they want. I think they're taking the mask off a little bit like Justice Alito did with Dobbs, and they understand that will entail significant adversarial brass knuckle politics, and that's what they're bringing out. And so, in terms of responding, I think we need to be, institutions need to understand that they are under systemic attack, that many of the criticisms they are facing, for example, the universities who are under massive attack by right-wing dark money interests around free speech issues and anti-Semitism. There may be some seeds of validity to those criticisms, but they're motivated by this broader desire to take out higher education in America. And higher education does not understand that is the threat it is facing, and is not making strategic responses accordingly. And
right.
So we, broadly speaking, need to sort of internalize what's actually happening here and be really forceful in responding back, and not sort of like cowering in fear that they're attacking us, because it's bad faith and part of a propaganda campaign.
Yes, it's all bad faith. It's all bad faith and part of a propaganda campaign. It's so frustrating. They make a thing up that didn't happen, and then I've got to react to it. And all I am saying, and I'm very involved in a local school board fight again as we speak this week, what I want to scream is, that's not a thing. It didn't happen. Don't worry. You don't have to worry about that thing that he's telling you to worry about, because it isn't.
Yeah. I don't know how much that works anymore. Post-Trump, I think, truth is so up for debate.
Well, there's no local journalism. And so you can say anything you want on Facebook. Every town, somebody's got to just do this story and explain how every town has a Facebook group, or 10. And if I go on Facebook right now and said that the school's on fire, a lot of people would believe it. They would get in their car. There would be nothing to fact check it, or something less urgent, that some longer term, pernicious thing is happening in our schools. I could go say it, even though it wasn't happening, and there would be no one to fact check that. There's the local journalism that works, even the online journalism. What's left of that is all about clicks and not actual journalism or objective journalism. So it's very, very hard to combat these things in your local town. Really hard. Yeah.
And I actually think, Pete, that trying to defend or kind of justify or explain or dismiss the attacks almost has no value. Like, defending yourself has no value, because the people they're trying to move on this and mobilize, they don't care, right? They're not open to reason.
Right.
So I actually think, and this is not the instinct of, I think, many people, in our sort of pro-democracy community, which generally I think values working together and seeing the good in each other and avoiding conflict if we can. I think the response is actually to strike back, right? Make clear what a bad faith, dark money funded operation this is, and what the true objectives of these people are as they try to drive these narratives.
I so appreciate talking to you, the way that you explain this stuff, so straightforward and forthright and clear. Just to end on kind of a positive note, you always have a lot of levers to pull, letters to write, things to do. So what would you tell people listening who we've just panicked?
So I think you just gotta figure out a way to get your representatives engaged around this stuff. I think there's a real disconnect right now between public engagement around the corruption of the Supreme Court, all this other stuff, Project 2025, the threat of theocratic Christian nationalism, and the way our elected leaders in the most important power centers are responding. And there's a lot that explains that, right? There's cultural attachment to the court being good. There's institutionalist impulses that make them fear attacking some of these bad actors. There are concerns about blowback that they will receive. But what those members of Congress and other leaders need to have to be able to be the leaders we need them to be to save us in this sort of crisis moment is to hear en masse from their constituents. Like, So, and they're starting to see it. We're going to start to narrow this gap, but people really need to mobilize and activate around it. And so if you're an activist or an advocate or a writer or, a citizen just engaged in the world, thinking about ways to integrate, questions of judicial power and court reform into the work you're doing or into the conversations you're having, I think is just absolutely essential, because it's sort of a meta issue that, stitches together every community of interest in the entire country. And we need to think through ways to work better together, to see this common thread and to save ourselves together through active engagement in the democratic process. Nobody is going to save us from this. The courts are not going to save us. The current elected Democratic Party is not going to save us from this threat. We need to mobilize and change the conditions on the ground so that we have a chance to pass the kind of stuff that would actually constrain this court and give us a chance. And those ideas exist. We're developing them.
Fully agree, and I'm glad you are. We are the ones we've been waiting for. I mean, I'm glad it's you. I feel less safe that it's me that's involved, because you're the lieutenant and we're there at the trench and you're saying, wait, hold. And I go, no, Alex, I'm going out there. And I get shot immediately. But you're calm and smart and a great leader. So I'll do whatever you say. And one of the things that you say, you have some great language that people can use when they do contact their congressmen, their legislators. And I'll try to include some of that in the show links or let people know where they can find it. Because you want to know what language people want to do things, and they want to say things. They don't always know what to do, who to say it to, and then what to say. And you've always got good recommendations. So I'll include that. Yeah.
And we're trying to get that stuff out. We work with a ton of advocacy partners, and we're in touch a lot with, folks on the Hill, and, trying to get these messages out. If folks would like to learn more about our work, we don't have much of a web presence, but you can find me on Twitter, Alex Aronson. Send me a DM. I'm happy to talk to you about that.
Absolutely. Reach out to Alex on Twitter for those of you that remain on this island that we still think we need to be on. It's got to be there. Got to be there, I think. Alex, thank you so much for talking to me. I'll let you go.
Thanks for your consistent engagement on this stuff. I really appreciate it.
Of course. All right, there goes Alex Aronson. Do me a favor and go tweet him. Go let him know that you appreciate him joining me here on today's episode of Stand Up. He will see those tweets and he will appreciate it, and it'll be motivating. Support his nonprofit, Court Accountability, and look for more from Alex Aronson, who I greatly appreciate joining me on the show. But mostly I appreciate you listening to the show, because I wouldn't do it, couldn't do it without your support. If you haven't signed up for a paid subscription, hey, get on top of that right now. I've got to ask, of course, every day, a couple times a day. Hope to see you in Las Vegas for Pod Jam, March 22nd and 23rd. Hope to see you at tonight's Hangout, you bumblebees especially. Bumblebees listening all the way to the very end of the episode today and every day that you can. I love you guys. All right, John Carroll, love you too. Taking us out. Talk to you later tomorrow or even tonight. Bye-bye.
Keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up and show obedience to the voice inside. And listen well and it'll tell you not to run and